Welcome to the CashFlow Quest panel. We're excited. We're going to run through the reasons why we love the manufactured housing space so much more than other residential investments within real estate. And we have just a lot of historic background information on why we have been chasing a mobile home park as an investment over apartments. And so we wanted to kind of have that discussion and lay out all the facts and why we truly believe in the space over and above other residential investments.
It's obviously, as a space, it's been very near and dear to our hearts. And we've been in this space now for 15, going on 16 years. So we like to think we know it a little bit, but we surprise ourselves all the time and we're always learning new things. So you never know it all. That's for sure.
Well, and I can honestly say, I feel like we're just getting started.
Yeah.
You know, like finally we've caught our flow. We know how to operate. We know how to really do a good job across a lot of the different aspects, but then we're continuing to learn on how to best efficiently operate them, cut costs on the operational and expense side, but also ratchet revenues and improve the overall revenue and collections, and how to do the manufactured home, like new deliveries and setting new homes in the communities. And there's just a lot to it.
What is a mobile home park? You know, I still get questions of this today, and it is different than an apartment community or other real estate assets. And so Ben or Ty, do one of you want to answer that question and like help us define that for us?
Oh, I want Ben to take this one. I want to see what the answer is. What's the professional answer to that question?
So the way that I define a mobile home park to many of our investors, and you're right, Jen, I get this question a lot, and I think I assume that people understand what it is. The way that I define it, it's a land lease community where the tenants own the physical structures, the homes, and we own the land, the infrastructures, and the amenities that comprise of that community. So I've used it in different ways, you know, because sometimes people are like, I think I get it. Maybe I don't. You can kind of think of it similar to an HOA. If someone told me it's an HOA, I would say it's not an HOA, but it's a way for someone to grasp it because people understand what an HOA is. But the best way to think about it is it's a land lease community where the tenants, we lease out the spaces to the tenants who live in our communities. They own the physical structure and they pay us what's called a space or a lot rent for us to provide a safe, clean community where they could hook up the infrastructure, meaning water, sewer, gas, electrical. And then they could use the shared amenity package, which could be, street lights, clubhouses, a gated fence, security, any other amenities you could think about, playgrounds, pools. The list goes on and on. But that's how I really define it, pretty simply.
I'll hammer it home. So you have roughly a 100 site mobile home park. So picture a 10-acre parcel of land. And all you have to do from our standpoint is own and operate the water, sewer, electrical connections to all the homes. Then you have maybe a small clubhouse and a pool. And so it's really a straightforward deal because we own the land, the infrastructure. Sometimes we don't even own the infrastructure. The city owns it and operates it on the behalf of the community. So there's a lot of different nuances to each, but basically it's a bunch of trailers renting each individual lot at a space rent or a lot rent amount. And then the utilities are billed direct. In a perfect world scenario, they receive all of their water, sewer, and trash and electrical bills direct. Sometimes we bill for it, but it's really simple. And that's why we love it, because it's that simple. You don't have to take care of the structure. And that's huge on the expense side. Whenever a unit turns over, most of the time in a good, well-run community, the unit is turned over amongst one resident to another. They actually sell the home they list it for sale and or use a residential agent that specializes in manufactured homes. They'll sell it from one party to the next. And meanwhile, we're collecting space rent even through that transition and through the approval process for the community so that we can collect rent the whole time. So sometimes there's a deal to be made where the resident's going out and then the next month the resident moves in. So we'll be interacting with the new incoming residents for those types of moments. but it's a really simple way to collect rent and not have to maintain the structures. We're only on the hook to maintain the pool if it has it, the clubhouse structure, and anything park, playground, and then the streets. Honestly, the streets probably cost us the most. And other than if we have to fix like water line repairs, water line breaks, sewer stoppage, anything like that we have to replace and repair. But in the end, it keeps your P&L and your expense load way further into like the 20s and 30% versus, apartment communities closer to like a 40 or 50% expense load.
Mm-hmm. So I think this might be a good time too to pivot to like, you're talking about the inventory and these homes, manufactured homes that the residents own. They own the structure that's on the lease land, right? Is what we're saying. And so I want to talk about a little bit about that and kind of let the listener learn more about the home specifically. So there's a couple of different ways we can do this. But if the home's existing in the space, then a resident, like Blake was saying, could sell the home from, to another incoming resident. Or they can, if we have a park that has a vacant space, then there's a couple of ways we could get homes in that space too, where, you can hire a dealer, a third party manufactured home dealer to pull a home and pull it into that vacant pad and then sell it to an end user. Or we have, as an owner operator, we have applied and have a dealership license that we then buy direct from the manufacturers. And the three main manufacturers that we work with are Champion, Cavco, and Clayton. There are many more, but those are the three that we use most often.
And those are the most popular in Arizona. So as you go throughout the country, there's other manufacturers in different locations,
right? Which
makes it the cheapest option from, transport, so is other guys they're not going to build a home in Texas and send it to Arizona while they have plants in Arizona.
Well,
exactly.
Also, there's like state stipulations. So usually you have to have them certified engineered plans to come into that state. And so if you're an operator out of, say Texas, we've run into this where they never got the home certified for Arizona HUD compliance. And then they run into issues where you actually can't get a permit for the house because it didn't meet the building code for the state. So that's just something that comes in. And I just think in general, something that's unique about professional operators, once you get to that level, legally, most parks are unable to own over a specified amount of homes in a year. I think it's 2 houses in the fiscal year. And so basically through legal action and just natural turnover, maybe someone passes away and no one else is handed the title, they don't legally own it. The park can only assume so many park-owned homes. So what ends up happening as you get bigger and become a professional operator is you end up getting these houses, and the way you professionally manage them is through getting a license as a dealership.
Maybe just really quick, you said park-owned homes. Want to just maybe quickly define park-owned homes versus tenant-owned homes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so pretty straightforward. Park-owned home would be something that the company owns, right? We get these through legal abandonment. Sometimes we buy a community and they already had some park-owned homes. Maybe some of the homes in the community are rentals. And so, when you're looking at a mobile home park from a broad standpoint, the easiest way to look at it is leasing the land, right? Mm-hmm. Each space is leased. But there's all kinds of different scenarios. You run into this in Texas where some of the communities, every single house is owned by the park and they have a whole different type of legal arrangement set up. And so we have a limited number. I think that right now we own 283 houses out of 2,300 units. So small percentage of our park owned of our total spaces is park owned inventory, but it's just things that come from us either renting it, we've gotten it through a legal possession, or we're flooring new inventory to sell.
Here, one more point, just so that way we can hammer it down. So if we own a park owned home, does the tenant both pay the space rent and then the rent to actually occupy that home that we own? Can you just run through that a little bit as well?
Yeah. So that kind of comes into legal paperwork now as we move forward. If you're dealing with Fannie and Freddie, the two bigger federally funded mortgagers, they want you to separate in the lease, but ultimately the resident is paying the site rent and a rental markup on the house, right? So obviously if you've got your own home and you're just paying for it to be sitting in the park, maybe you're paying $600 to $800 a month. Well, if it's our house and we've got a mortgage on it because it's a nicer, newer home and we have to pay an insurance amount, maybe you're paying $1,200 or $1,300 a month. And usually that falls somewhere in the range of half of what the local 2-bedroom apartments are. So it's still a great deal.
And we do break it up. We break it up on the collection now. At a minimum on our books, we break up the collection for the home rent and the space rent. Because for the lender, you really want it clean and clear of how much money is being collected for the space rent. And the home rental business on that side, what's kind of an interesting piece of like what Tide said is we didn't end up getting our dealer's license until we bought a deal where we inherited like 70 homes, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need to get my dealer's license, and it just hit us. And so we started transacting a lot of higher volume on the mobile home sales to residents so that we could shift the communities back, because it's a value add opportunity to take these weird old rental programs that these previous owners of these mobile home parks have started and shift it back to something that's way more transactable, which is you want the residents to own the homes. In the end, everything we do is to shift the communities in our base back to all the residents owning the homes. It's just, how do we get there? What's the quickest way? And we've in vacancies. So if we buy a new park, a new manufactured home community that has 20 or 30% vacant, we're going to choose to floor the inventory ourselves as a dealer for manufactured housing. We can buy the homes direct, plug them into the sites, and now we're in control of the turnover, or like how fast we can, I should say, absorb those into the market.
And I think too, what's so amazing about that process is that we're able to keep the affordability in place. And I'll let you maybe talk about it or Tide more. But what I love about the fact that we have control and we're actually the dealer, there's a lot of efficiencies, but one of the, the biggest efficiencies and biggest bonuses is that we can control costs and sell homes direct to residents without large markups. And we could do that because we're cutting out the middleman, and then we can keep that affordability in place and then focus more on the bread and butter, which to your point was the space rent.
Yep. The goal is to always keep the home price at around whatever it costs to replace. And it's an industry kind of, I'd say, trend now to basically sell the homes for cost, plus maybe some of the setup costs. But there's a lot of talk now that we're really, as an industry, trying to continue to keep that home price as low as possible so that we can focus on the lot rent as an industry, because that's where the long-term rental value is. But also, you don't want the residents to have this huge mortgage on a manufactured house, which in the right environments, they do depreciate. Now, with like fiscal, depending on fiscal policy, like when we have a bunch of inflation, the mobile homes actually appreciate in value versus depreciate. And that's an important piece of like kind of the model, is that the homes themselves, the more you improve the community, even if lot rent goes up, we're talking, under 10% a year most of the time on a stabilized asset, we're typically doing 5%-ish rental increases on the lot rent. So if you keep the mobile home at like replacement value, even on a brand new one or less, it just creates that affordable product that we really are after, which is that non-subsidized affordability and a good starter home dynamic where the all-in payment for the home and the space rent is like no more than 2/3 of a comparable square footage apartment.
That's such an important point that you brought up. And I get that, I've had professors and other, in academia, like when I'm trying to educate them on the space, they say, well, doesn't it just depreciate the homes, right? And that is such an important distinction that you brought up, is that it depends on the business side, the market cycle, business cycle. But most importantly, if you improve the community, if there's demand to live in that community, that home will appreciate higher than its replacement value. It's such an important distinction that you pointed out. And I think that people don't understand that.
I used to get in arguments with my dad about this specifically because we were taking on debt to floor, a bunch of manufactured homes that were brand new. And it was kind of like, he's like, I don't know, this seems a little crazy, and we're ordering 100 homes a year for a couple of years, when we first got into the value add space. And I'm like, okay, but Dad, it's a house. And it's like, with like the weird kind of stigma around living in a manufactured house. Thank you. It's the fact that it is a normal to HUD code home. And so if we own it and we have to, like the concern was if something happened and the economy took a turn, we may not be able to sell them. So we will have to rent them. Like, well, it's a house. We'll rent it. There's demand. And then there's demand for a affordable house, especially if we can beat apartments all in with the space rent and the house cost. And so, in the homes that we bought leading up to COVID, before prices on manufactured homes kind of ramped because of everything just got more expensive for the manufacturers to buy the actual hard goods to build the homes. Before that, we made money. We were like doubling the values on some of our old single wides. We were buying single wides like, probably 2015, 2016, 2017. We were buying single wides for $35,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many square feet is that?
800.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Like the square footage calculation on that back then was like $30 a foot. It was unreal. And so to go back a little bit more broad, why we fell in love with this space is at every turn, it was unbeatable on the cost efficiency of it. So like if you lose a home, we've lost homes to fires. We've lost probably, 10 homes over our life cycle to the homes burning down for one reason or another.
Or people pulling a home. Yeah.
People do pull homes every once in a while and buy a piece of land out in more rural Arizona in those cases. But what was really great is, let's say a home leaves a space or burns or gets some type of, issue where the windows were left open on a home that we were in abandonment process and it gets just completely, hammered and vandalized or whatever. You replace one home. Whereas if you have an apartment deal that's 100 units and it catches on fire, it's going to do massive damage to the core structures or a significant chunk of that building. So it isolates the risk. Not to mention now you can replace each unit at $50 a square foot. Mm-hmm. So even though you're going to play the market trend of how much a home costs, the ability to replace those homes at a very low cost standpoint is gold. And no zoning required. You do have to get local permits, but like there's no BS around the approval of being able to put that home back in. So it's a very resilient asset class. It can weather a lot of storms. We've heard like worst case scenario is the entire community is in like Northern California. We've heard of several communities that burned in those fires. That's worst case scenario. But with insurance money, you can redo the infrastructure components that need to be rebuilt. And in good markets, you can sell brand new homes and you basically wipe the slate clean and build a brand new manufactured home community. And the homes sell pretty quick because now it's going to be brand new. Mm-hmm. The whole community, the clubhouse, the pool area, like with insurance money, you just rebuild the community even better. And within like 5 years, my buddy was completely able to rebuild the communities that were lost.
And when we're talking about the benefits of a manufactured housing community versus some of the other aspects, whether it's residential or a multifamily project, I think specifically, a lot of people that come to us are like, well, why don't I just take my money and go buy a single family residential home and rent it out? Well, let's say that you have the means to buy one house here in San Diego and rent it out. Well, what happens if you lose a renter? What happens if someone opts not to pay? That's going to, even if you were making a better, spread right out the gate, probably not. No. But let's say that you are. If you're down that one tenant, it could drastically impact your financial viability. Whereas if you are investing in 100 or 200 space mobile home park and there's an eviction or there's somebody who decides that they want to move out or someone passes away, it doesn't wildly affect your cash flow model the way that it would on a single family residential home or a duplex or a quadplex.
Perfect example is you hit the lottery. Let's say you make $10 million and you hit the lottery and you're like, you know what? I want to be really cost conscious. I want to go to cash flow with my money. I want to be as tax efficient as possible. If you were to take your 10 mil and go pay cash for single family homes, the cost to operate those single family homes would be more than the cost to operate a mobile home park. And I actually have a friend in the space that was a software developer, sold, kind of had like a lottery moment in his 20s, bought like 30 homes and was doing the math. And he's a pretty smart guy. He did the math and figured out that it was not a good asset to scale because with all of those homes that you own and you have to replace and fix those systems all isolated, all separate, You have 30 homes that are now falling apart. You have to do roofs. You have damage that trees cause. You have HVAC systems, all of the internals. You now own all that. And so with mobile home parks, we only own homes to then shift it and sell them within 5 years of new homes. We're selling them all off.
Yeah, it's a different model.
So then this is the key point, so that you don't have to maintain those systems. The residents take ownership of the home and they maintain those systems on their own dime, but then also take ownership of the surrounding area on their lot. And that's so much better than multifamily assets where like we've lived in them growing up and in our 20s, like the elevators are beat, like, people are moving in and out. The walls are all scuffed. Like it's very different when you own your own place. You're going to treat it with a lot more respect. And that's like when you shift that ownership to the residents and the homeowners now are homeowners. And all we're doing is basically operating the HOA. We own the real estate and we get to, in this case, dictate the rules of cleanliness and upkeep and paint colors. You can't paint your house purple or yellow. Sorry. And, you play this game of, okay, hey, we're going to operate this, but almost better than HOAs. Because I could get going on HOAs. I think they're very unorganized because it's a bunch of people that want to pinch pennies for their community. Whereas we can control it on our end and budget accordingly to make really nice improvements every 5 to 10 years.
Well, I want to jump in here and make a couple quick points. First thing, we're talking about depreciation on mobile homes, and just general conversation. And it's very similar to single family houses. Like if you buy a house in a great neighborhood and then it goes to hell in a handbasket, the value on that house goes down. Like look at housing in, downtown Detroit versus where it was 20 years ago, right? It's obvious an example of where buying single family residential house is not always some elevator to financial success. And it's the same thing in our communities, right? And I think that a lot of times the bad apples, people who have, I call them vampire operators. These are people who buy mobile home parks. They don't have the means, money, or attitude to operate them, and they just let them degrade over 20 years. Well, yeah, obviously those houses now are worthless, or they get to a low point, right? They're worth something, but very, very different than what they were purchased for versus when we come in and we're putting in new streets, we're bringing in flooring new houses, we're making it a nicer place. We have regional office teams that are coming through, driving through, making sure that someone doesn't paint their house turquoise. What ends up happening is those houses start to appreciate. And we see this all the time, it's like if you buy a brand new house here in San Diego and now the interest rates change, well, maybe the value on your house went down. Right. And
I think what you're touching on is such an important and critical part of why what we do is so important of keeping the affordable stock in place. Mobile home parks are the only real estate asset class I know of that has an ever-growing demand and a shrinking supply. And you don't need to be an economist to know that that is the perfect scenario for asymmetric returns, meaning taking less risk and getting outperformance or higher returns. And that's why what we do is so important of reinvesting into these communities so they do not get demolished and repurposed into something else, either higher end apartment or higher end retail or whatever it may be. But the fact that we're keeping affordable stock in the marketplace is so important. And that's a huge purpose of why we love the space so much. And we'll go into the returns and why they're great for investors. But if there's anything that the listeners can take away from, and this is the thing that I tell everyone, it's the only real estate asset class I know that has a shrinking supply, meaning that more stock or more mobile home parks are taken out of the market every year than are put back in. And you have an ever growing demand in terms of the need for affordable housing.
Well, and the more challenging affordability gets, the more customers we have, which is the uncorrelated nature of the business, is the pool of buyers for mobile homes gets bigger at any time there's bad news, bad economy, interest rates are higher. You just end up with an uncorrelated effect with our supply of people coming into the space, needing to live in an affordable place. And that's why we believe in making sure we do everything in our power to be a good steward of these communities and add a ton of value on the front end. Obviously, we've learned a lot, and it's not always been our abilities couldn't always keep up with how much we wanted to grow. And now we've learned a ton now doing it for 15, 16 years. But let me quickly run through. We chatted off camera about some of the good old boys in the space. So Sam Zell, who's now passed, he was one of, if not the largest manufactured home community owner for years and years, and operated a company called Equity Lifestyles. And I think it was Equity Lifestyles Properties or Communities. But it's still a REIT on the stock market, and it pays like a 3% dividend, and that's it. Really, I don't think you get any other growth. Maybe then you can play the stock valuation, the price per share. But he, quote unquote, has been on camera several times saying that the manufactured home community or mobile home park or trailer park is the best real estate investment that was ever created. And it had a heyday of a build out in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then that was kind of it, because cities caught on and everyone kind of got into a broader scale build out in multifamily and apartments. So there was this window where the supply came online. And he figured it out in the 90s and raised a ton of money, institutional, you name it, and bought most of the Cherry assets across the country. And then there's been several other companies, 2 or 3 other notable companies that have kind of built the rest of the portfolios or started building again. But like building in our space is like maybe a couple thousand units here and there dispersed across the whole country.
Yeah, it's not keeping up with the demand.
There are also master plan communities that are really very high end, right? So like I wouldn't even compare them necessarily to a great example of affordable housing versus what we, kind of stick in our space. These are places with yoga studios and, $250,000 mobile homes. That's what's being developed now versus our competitive,
which are more like luxury second homes, to your point.
Exactly.
It's not even a first home.
And I think this is just a fun segue into a little bit of the history of manufactured housing. Back in the day, there wasn't such a build out of, motels and hotels throughout the country. And so really it was wealthy people traveling. And so, if you're going to go travel across country and you're not sure where you're going to stay, or you're going to stay in some ratty place, you're an affluent person, maybe you hook a fifth wheel trailer to your Ford Falcon or your Cadillac. And so it really started off as kind of affluent. Obviously there's a little bit of a background in military housing that affected it, but it was a wealthy kind of cool thing. Elvis Presley lived in a mobile home. There's a lot of stuff that was like cool in like the 50s and 60s. And you look at these old homes and they're like beautiful. You look at them and you're like, I would live in that. It's really retro styling and modern, even, looking at it now. And so what happens is you have in the 70s this boom, what we call the golden era of manufactured housing. There's, something like 50 or 60% of every mobile home park built in the country was built in the 70s. And so we get this huge thing and it ends up becoming an affordable option for a lot of people. And I think that what oftentimes, we see this all the time. It's an owner, right? He has a 2-story house in the middle of the desert. He builds this manufactured home around, and then 20, 30 years later, it's been passed down to generations. The grandkids never ran it right. It's been poorly managed. And that's where you get this trailer park, ratty out, bad place. And that's where you get the Joe Dirt kind of mentality where people have got this bad thing. What ends up happening is local municipalities, they don't want this. They don't want these places where there's drug, crime problems and all these things happening. So what they start doing is they start blocking the zoning. And so that's where you get that restriction, that tightening of zoning availability for manufactured housing. And so now you're seeing people like us, which I would consider middle ground. And then you obviously have these institutional buyers that are going in and making these wonderful places to live. But that's what you're talking about. It's like, we're cleaning up. That's the spread right there. That's the growth from a economic standpoint of we're bringing this back up to where it should be. But the municipalities, the local state governments, they haven't caught up. They're restricting. They're bulldogs preventing the production of more of these affordable housing places.
We need affordable housing in all of these communities. And it's an incredible way to give supply to that demand. But if they won't let more be developed, then it, doesn't let that happen. But that's what's so great about this particular space. If you can get an owner operator or somebody who would come in and buy one of these 70s era properties and bring it back to life and increase the supply in that particular city for affordable housing that is not government subsidized, it's a win-win for everybody. And so And that's one of the reasons why we love the space, and it's the
why
opportunity.
We're here.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to
Perfect.
kick off my favorite, we all have our opinions and thoughts on manufactured housing. I want to give my favorite tool that it has against multifamily and why I think it's a better asset class. And that comes to turnover.
Yeah.
So when, we have one apartment complex that we manage, and then obviously we have communities that have a higher threshold of park owned inventory. And what we see is if you're a renter, you have kind of a renter mentality. Yeah, there are people who stay in the same unit for 20 years, very few and far in between. What happens is you live a place for 6 months to a year, then you're out. And what we see in multifamily is about, I think it's 50% turnover on average. So half of your units are moving out. Well, what happens when someone moves out? Did they damage the unit?
Right.
Is everything perfect? Even if it was, the old lady and one cat, that cat had a little smell, some of the paint needs to be touched up. There's work, effort to turn units.
Absolutely.
And so what we see is on our P&Ls, the parks that have the higher expense ratios and have the higher turnover amounts are the ones that have more park owned inventory. And so that's not a bad thing. We go in there with underwriting to make sure that we vet that situation. But when we're comparing ourselves to apartment complexes, what a job. I mean, 50%, if you have a 200 space, you're flipping 100 units a year. That's a lot of work where we're not doing that. Some of our parks, it's 100% park owned. We have 5% turnover. That's 5 people. And 3 of those 5 gave it to their neighbor or their friend and did some type of deal. We got paid the whole time. They got approved for the community. And it's like clockwork, very simple to manage.
And a stabilized mobile home park, 5% is actually on the high end. If you're talking about true turnover, it's more like 2 to 3% on a stabilized, all resident owned mobile home park.
And when you add in good customer service, good bones from, community standpoint with
location of the deals in a good spot,
then it really is less than 5 because
and then
the
turnover
retention
actually doesn't even impact us on those deals because they trade amongst themselves and they keep paying rent.
Which is like what I meant.
It doesn't get any better than that.
No, it's such an important point that, and I'm sure when I wanted to almost put a finer point on it because I'm sure listeners are probably brushing over that. But think about it, just like to your point, if the current tenant is transacting with a real estate broker or someone else and they're paying space rent the entire time, you have no what's called downtime where you're not receiving rent. So it's such an important distinction, and what Ty, eloquently laid out was just awesome about the history and then as far as like how to differentiate between park owned homes and tenant owned homes and how all these play into the different risk buckets when we're looking at deals, and not all deals are the same. But one thing I want to say, and I'm going to have Blake, you jump in here and I'll just kind of start it off. So I used to manage, Class A apartment complexes. I know you guys have experience in that as well. That was your background, and you're exactly right. About 50% of the rent roll or the tenants leave in a given year, and it just makes sense, right? Because there's a renter's mentality. Oh, a new shinier building opens up across the street, or I came down here, I'm short term, I'm in college, or I get married, so I need something bigger. So it makes sense why that turnover occurs. But because of that turnover that happens throughout a year, an apartment owner can always mark to market rents. And so it works great when you have upcycles like we had during, pre-COVID, but during the early years of COVID, where you saw rents across multifamily jump up like 20% nationwide, and you're able to mark to market and capture that rent growth. But it also works in the reverse, like you're seeing today, when you start to see more vacancy increase because of all this new supply that's coming online, 40-year high of supply that's coming online right now.
They're building a lot of apartments right now in a lot of the major metropolitan areas. The building of apartments is huge.
Exactly.
Thousands of units.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you, if I was a developer and I'm bringing, I'm putting in all this risk, all this capital, all of this expensive construction debt, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to deliver an apartment complex to the market. But if I want to get taken out on that construction debt, I need to stabilize that deal. I need to get to 95%. That way Fannie or Freddie or the agencies I can get what's called permanent financing on it. So what do I do if I'm the developer? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to focus on occupancy more than anything. And so they're not going to drop rents necessarily, but there's another way you could kind of drop rents, and it's through free rent.
couple months of free rent.
Exactly. And so, hey, right. But it's concessions, right? Yeah. Right. Another word for concessions, right? You could do all
you
types of
incentivize the incoming resident to want to live there and sign a longer term lease, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to get the rents. Maybe you give them 2 free months, but you get a 14-month lease. Now you've captured that 12 months of income that you need on a financial statement to then secure a more permanent debt style.
Exactly. And if you're a resident, you're like, I'm only going to be here for a year. If I take 1 month free rent,
gives me 60 extra days.
I'm not paying $3,500. I'm paying $3,250.
Right.
And I'm paying $3,300 for this place, and it's not as nice. Right. This place has the nicer gym.
It's
so then I move.
Brand new.
Right. And
well,
so that
it creates a vacuum on anybody that's even close to their renewal date around in other multifamily assets that are maybe a few years stable. It just creates a vacuum and pulls all those people into the new multifamily builds.
Right.
Because they get a couple months free rent. I mean, that's substantial.
Right.
$3,000, $4,000, $5,000.
Right.
Like brand new multifamily assets are, $2,500, $3,000 a month, depending on the market. But like most of the markets we're talking about are that high.
So Blake, our favorite book, right? Every real estate investor should read this book. Read it to your kids. Most important book of all time. It is The Tortoise and the Hare.
Yeah.
So Blake,
talk
since we're on rent growth, talk about the Tortoise and the Hare and compare us from mobile home parks to apartments.
Well, and I think that something that we've talked about and sort of raised the eyebrows of some very sophisticated multifamily guys, and they know it, but it's interesting when you highlight it, was now the data machine and the interaction between residents and apartments and the ability to market to those residents with social media, with online, the Zillows of the world, apartments.com, like all these real-time pricing. What's happening is you can interact with the residents, the customers, so much more quickly. And then the computer system, which is like all the main management softwares, it's not their fault. You got RealPage and Yardi and a few more. We use Rent Manager. But when you have real-time dynamic pricing in the mix, what's going to happen is when you're in a state of fear, like with what happened with COVID, everyone was hot potato. They just wanted into a place, and they wanted a good quality place. And then the work from home dynamic completely shifted. You now wanted a higher quality place and potentially more expensive with an extra room so you could set up an office. So it created this like red fire hot demand on multifamily assets and ran the computer dynamic pricing straight up through the moon, which is like unprecedented. Like it just hit the right moment in time where the data was finally getting in and settling on the operational front. People were starting to like switch over. Hey, you get an extra $20 a month over here from an operator's perspective. So what happened was it ran the rent roll on the 50% turnover for those 2 to 3 years. It ran it higher on the rate increases than have ever been seen before. And so that caused like the multifamily realm on the data to spike. Mm-hmm. But what's really interesting, and I've been reading a new book, it's called Money GPT by Jim Rickards. Everyone should check it out because it kind of lays this point out now too with AI on the markets. But anyways, this is what happened. The data on the rent rates skyrocketed because basically the data says, hey, if you put this unit out for, let's just say $2,500 and it rents, the data goes, oh, well, let's try $2,550.
Correct.
It rents. Let's try $2,600.
And this, you guys, is the definition of dynamic pricing.
And it's just like on Airbnb where Friday night's the most expensive and Saturday night's the most expensive. It's the same thing.
Airlines have been doing this forever.
So now the data machine on the property management side is catching up. So the peak was way higher. The price that the apartments rented for was way higher. But then guess what? Now what happens? You chase it down when there's nobody there to rent a unit and the system goes, oh, we're not renting. Let's reduce rate. Let's reduce rate. Let's reduce rate. And it reduces rate. It also goes vertical down the other side. So it created these crazy peaks in the lease up and the rental rates for that segment of time. And so that's the Hare and the Tortoise and the Hare. They're the Hare. And our industry is way slower to move because we only have up to 5% turnover per year. So we can't adjust the rent roll in swaths like that, 50% at a time per year. The data is slower. So every year, for the most part, we do one increase.
Which
So-
is different too from a mobile home park space versus apartments.
Correct.
Because typically in an apartment, you have, you know, in a 200 unit apartment, you have 200 different leases all expiring throughout the year. Where in a mobile home park, typically they can be on annual leases, but they usually are on month-to-month leases. And so it allows you to create that annual increase across the board, which is very different than other asset classes.
It's
So,
also more, in my
yeah.
opinion, more fair, right? Like depending on when your lease happens and what's going on in the Middle East that day, like
Right.
that shouldn't affect what your rent price is.
Right.
And so knowing, I mean, once we started, you know, setting set pricing versus doing amounts, saying, hey, this is the new rate for the year and this is what everyone around you is paying, we've actually had less complaints from our consumers. And I think that it's just another benefit. It's also, you know, when we're talking about benefits, part of this comes with ease of doing the job. It's much easier to do one rental increase a year at a park than to be doing 200 throughout the year.
Mhm.
Which is
Yeah.
why they created a system to do that and manage the rate increases on scale. Every month
Right.
you have so many with apartment leases. But in our space, it's very simple.
Which is
Keep it
yeah.
simple, you
Yeah.
know, and that's the nature of that. So I'd say that's a really cool dynamic in the difference between, because right now we're now looking up, and even with the swing up and then now the little bit of a cooling effect on rental rates for multi, we're now just playing catch up on
Yeah.
our percentage.
I was gonna say,
And we want to be
yeah.
roughly, we're settling in most markets around like 60% of an equivalent multifamily asset, equivalent square footage in the unit. But then if we go in and spend money on the clubhouses and the amenities, we're finding that people would even prefer it to, especially a brand new home in a community that we fixed up. People would prefer it to a multifamily asset where you have to walk up several flights of stairs, you
or
know,
go
like
up an elevator and park, you know, further away.
you have to park. Yeah, you don't
No
have
shared
storage.
walls.
No,
you
right.
have your own front side.
You get a little yard for
yeah.
a dog or a pet. You
Everyone
know,
loves dogs these days. You know, you gotta have a little doggy yard.
Well, I have a good friend. He lives in a beautiful loft. He actually just moved into Mission Valley, but he was living in a beautiful like penthouse in downtown. And I'd go to visit him, and his spread was sweet. You know, beautiful. You can see everything in San Diego.
Yeah.
But it smelled like dog pee in the elevator, and walking up, there's dog poop and pee everywhere in downtown San Diego. It's like all these people who are living these high end, you know,
Beautiful.
rental units downtown,
view
they have
places.
dogs, and where the dogs go, like there's no, you know, grassy lawn right outside of the Windsor or whatever, you know, place they're staying. And so, yeah, I just noticed that like lots of animals defecating on the streets.
And in the hallways. Yeah.
We don't have that in our mobile home parks.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
too, just like going back to the Tortoise and the Hare, you know, mobile home parks being the Tortoise, that predictability and that certainty around the rental increase, what that does over time to the valuation of that real estate is why it goes back to our earlier point of it provides these asymmetric returns and and provides the stability. And, you know, you hear recession resilient or resistant, right? And that's really like the underlying, you know, driver of that is because we are able to we're not trying to chase the market. We're just consistently pacing the market. It's kind of like a submarine you know, sometimes, and that versus, you know, a boat or a ship up top where, you know, the winds can pick up, the waves can pick up, and you can't catch these
Yeah.
you know, waves, or we're just kind of consistently cruising along no matter what, you know, the winds or the waves are doing.
Everyone deals with a lot more, you know, headwind.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Yeah. Or tailwind sometimes, right?
Yeah,
And they can go on these big runs. And so, but
Well,
if
and
you're,
we have that too with, you know, the tailwind aspect of like, as the apartment communities are having this dynamic pricing where they go up and then sometimes they'll come back down. You know, Blake, you were saying that we do typical,
We just
like
catch the surge.
5%.
Yeah.
5% annual increases. Well, we might have years where we get to do 10 or even like 12, which is like crazy. And you would never see that typically in a renewal situation in an apartment community. But in our space, when the dynamic pricing for them goes through, even when we do a 10% annual increase, we're still the Tortoise because they're still going and we've only gone 10%. And so, you know, if they went 20, it's still kind of a Hare or a Tortoise catch up to the Hare, right?
Well, and then you take it out. Like our father was an apartment developer, which kind of got him into the understanding what's going on in the space, which is why he even loved mobile home parks more.
Right.
Because when you build a property, and like we have a property now that was that we're managing for the partnership, and it was $26 million to build, and
5-year project
in 2005. It was 2003 to 5, and that was when the construction was, and then finalized in 2005. But my point I'm making is it was $26 million.
Yep.
We're now looking at CapEx projects of probably $10 million. You know, when we go to refinance this and look to hold it long term, the cost associated with maintaining and keeping termites at bay, all the HVAC systems replaced and current, and then all our solar that we put in is kind of getting old now.
Yeah, the roof needs to be replaced.
The CapEx required to maintain the status quo and maintain rate growth is substantially higher
100%.
than just being able to replace a couple mobile homes here and there. Or heck, even if we end up with some that are pretty dilapidated, and when we buy deals, sometimes that's the case. We fix them up. We put 10 or 20 grand into these old homes, and they're nice. They're livable.
Yeah.
We put new countertops and little kitchens, Home Depot stuff in them, and they look great. And here we are with a $10,000 or $20,000 home that we can sell for 20 grand.
Which is amazing flexibility.
And those actually are super popular. You know, I think that's always an interesting, conversation you guys have with investors. Like, well, what do you do with the old houses? You guys touch them. Ultimately, our consumer base, a lot of times, like I was just touring a community in Tucson, and it was a young guy who came in with his girlfriend. I think that they had just maybe gotten married, but like, I don't know, maybe in their early 20s, pretty young. And they're looking to buy. They don't want to buy a $100,000 mobile home.
Right.
What do you have in the $15,000, $20,000 range? And if you're getting a house that we put new LVP throughout, we painted inside and out, we had the electrical and plumbing checked, and we're giving you a steal of a deal.
The bones of the house are good.
It's a turnkey little house for 15, 20 grand.
Yeah. And
new air conditioners, everything's safe and clean and well taken care of.
Clean and well.
I also get all the time like handymen, who will
specials.
Come, and we're getting bids, and it's like, hey, like this would be a great house for my kid. I want to buy it. And we're like, well, we want it. No, just give it to me. How much will you take for it? I'll take it off your hands. Start paying rent right away. I want to fix it up for my kid. It's like, cool, And so there is that consumer. And as things have inflated and we see that housing prices are more expensive, where else can you go and get a place to live for $15,000 to $20,000?
And where else can you do that?
$600 a month.
Yeah.
Nowhere else
Can you do that? Which is such a really cool, flexibility that this particular asset class offers. You can't do that in any other asset.
Which is kind of an interesting point that we learned the hard way, actually, because we pulled a bunch of homes over the years early on where we were like, all right, if it's going to cost us more than $5,000, let's just pull it and scrap it. And or there's some guys that would pull them and take them to Mexico, and they would build farm mobile home parks basically for farm workers down in Mexico. So we started doing that. Well, then we learned that if we spent 10 to 20 grand, we can actually spend the money and quickly get that cash out and get paid back and just sell a unit for 20 grand. That's a different dynamic. You keep the housing price at a lower level, and now the space rent can remain the focus on the investment side.
It's interesting. I read a research paper. Maybe I'll grab it and put it in the show notes for folks. I'll butcher the numbers, but the millennial and then the Gen Z, I think, is right behind the millennials. Had the highest view on living in a manufactured housing community. It was like 70% of the folks that they surveyed would consider living in a manufactured home. So it's not like this dying demographic, trend into MHC. I really think it is the future of affordability, and I say it all the time. That's why I'm so passionate about it. And so, to your point, I've talked to other young people as well. And they're like, "Yeah, I've been looking at mobile, living in a manufactured home." And I just I get all fired up in the inside because I'm like, yeah, it's a great option. It's an amazing, if you haven't seen
in the perception happening.
Correct.
That was actually from Grok. Grok said, the AI, that one of the major points is that the change in the perception from a consumer base is shifting. People are not afraid of the manufactured home anymore.
Yeah.
That's cool. Keep going.
The affordability is just a key point, I think, there, right? The affordability is just a critical piece.
Absolutely. I mean,
they're great good stick-built homes. They're just built in a factory.
That's the only thing that I was going to say. You're reminding me what I was going to say. It's just like, if you haven't toured a new manufactured home, I highly suggest you go do that. Once you're inside, you'll have no idea whether or not you're in a stick build or a manufactured home that came from a factory. It's all the same finishes, it's
same materials.
Same type of quality. They're beautiful. And the cost per foot it's like, it's less
unbeatable.
It's unbeatable.
I make the example all the time, and that's, you're hearing it here first. We're going to solve affordable housing here at Comfort Capital, and we're going to go big and get into newer stuff in the future, brand new builds, thousands of units. It's coming, because you would never ask somebody to come to your house and build a car in your garage.
Hey,
I want a new Ford pickup. Hey, all right, Ford can be there in 3 months, and it's going to take them 5 months, maybe 3 years to build this F-150 in your garage. And you're like, I think I'll just go buy one used, So home builders aren't going to be able to keep pace. Not to mention, a really good point I heard on the internet the other day was nobody's building 1,200 square footers anymore. Like 1,200, 1,400 square footers. Everything's 2,000 square feet, which means now you put a price per square foot, $200 per square foot on a single family home locally. You're talking $400,000 minimum. And that's all the starter homes we're seeing around our communities that we're buying in Arizona and Texas. There's a condo, maybe townhome for $350, but that's crazy. Whereas like we can provide a home. I've just signed orders over the last month or so for homes that are $55,000 for 800 square footers, maybe 2 1s, 2 2s, 3 2s on the smaller end for a 3-2, but still under 60, under 70 grand for a 3-2.
We're getting double wide, 3-bedroom, 2-bath right now. Double wide, right? Big floor plans, like 1,500, 2,000 square feet, around $70K.
Unreal.
You can't even build it on a lot for that much.
Well, speaking of F-150s, for the price of an F-150, you can get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, beautiful, brand new house. So,
no kidding. They're all
in
70
a well
grand.
taken care of community with activities and morale for the family.
How do you get access to this unicorn space?
You can get into the public side, like a stock, right? You can go buy ELS or Yes Communities or Sun Communities. Those trade on the public stock exchange, but it's going to perform different than how it will perform as owning it private, the way that we own it. And what do I mean by that? You're going to experience the volatility that comes with liquidity, because you could trade in and out, and all of Wall Street is doing that as well. And the entire world, your price fluctuation on the stock price is going to, keep you up at night if you're like me and you hate like looking at your phone and seeing what things are trading at, because you're just thinking about pluses and minuses.
But then you're getting a risk adjusted return because you're owning a massive pool of mobile home parks and you're taking stock in that massive pool. And I think the dividends are roughly 3% and you share no upside.
Yeah, you have no appreciation upside in the actual real estate.
Well, you do in the stock price, and it should value to the book value, right? The actual intrinsic value of the real estate. And so there could be some arbitrage that could happen there. But I think most importantly, like what's great about real estate is that it doesn't get priced daily. And the second component too is that you can have control and to improve that, specific asset to, really drive that appreciation through enhancements and CapEx or rental growth or occupancy increase. And then, another very important distinction too is just the way it's taxed. And we don't have the time to go through that. We could say that for another episode, but taxes, I'd love to dive into that as well. Owning the stock is not the same as owning the physical real estate. And there's major tax advantages or consequences.
So you can go on the public side, market, Wall Street, and buy into different companies that own them. And that's a different animal. That is a good argument for maybe a hedge factor with money that is already in play in the markets that you don't want to take out and receive gains on. That could be made. But then on the private equity side, you really have like some of these larger funds that you can allocate capital through. But at the same time, you're going into a big fund pool of properties. So the returns are going to be net lower. And then it's private equity in syndications like ours. And we choose to syndicate per each deal because each deal has its own kind of merits. And it's either, core plus or value add. And so the returns are going to shift a little bit per deal for us. in the end, I mean, I could see us raising funds so that you can kind of show, hey, you can put all your eggs across these deals that are all great, but they have some are more stable, some are more value add, and you can kind of play across the blend of those different deals. But we love short term, we love putting deals into a single LLC and raising the capital, because then our investors can kind of cherry pick. Some people love the value add and the dynamic. If you're a younger investor and you want to focus on IRR and like bigger gains on value add stuff.
Value add meaning just a higher risk opportunity, more
well, and it's got
upside of
vacancy. The rents are
Mm-hmm.
significantly under market. So you on the front end you take a little less on the cash on cash, but then on the back end you're going to double your money faster. The returns are going to be better. Then on the core stuff, it's going to pay a better coupon, and it's just going to, on the back end, it's not going to double your initial investment as quickly. But it trend wise, it all gets there in the end, because we're just playing this slow growth game on really sound fundamentals. And I think that's really it in a nutshell on that side.
There's one last part of this, and this is CashFlow Quest. Some of the people listening and tuning in here are entrepreneurs like we are, right? And so maybe you want to get into the space on your own. You don't want to invest in stock. You don't want to invest with groups putting funds together, or the way we syndicate. Maybe you want to get in for the first time, right? And so there's definitely a barrier to entry, as we've talked about the constriction on this product, especially in the middle and upper level asset quality. But I do think, and we've talked about this, that there's a really great opportunity if you're a young entrepreneur or someone who's just trying to get into the space. There are great little deals.
Yes.
Now they're going to run a little bit
are.
of a higher expense ratio, but if you want a really good cash on cash, higher cap rates, some of these smaller parks, 20 to 40 units. I see coupon clippers a lot where it's like, start there. That's where this company started. We started with the 28 space community. I'll never forget it. It had 2 clean outs and 100 cottonwood trees all around it that pushed through that plumbing like you wouldn't believe. But
clay pipe.
But at the end of the day, at cash flow really, really
it was
well.
a 12 cap.
Yeah.
it was a 12 cap, and I see little deals all the time, where brokers are sending it. They send all kinds of stuff. And it's funny because I see on LinkedIn a lot where it's like, there's no such thing as good cap rates anymore, blah, 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 blah. You're 100% right on high quality 100, 200, 300 space communities. But for the young entrepreneur trying to get into this space, I think there's a lot of room to be had. And we'd love to, have chats with you guys about it.
Yep. And that's, I was going to actually touch on that point. The biggest thing to remember as you're starting out as in chasing residential cash flow is you want to get into a consolidated, as many units as you can, and like Grant Cardone got in hot water with Robert Kiyosaki. He's like, you don't want to start on a single house or a duplex. You want to buy a cheap 30 unit.
Right.
40 units. So
because then
and
one or two vacancy
Yes.
don't crush you. Yeah.
I mean, literally it goes from, if you have 1 or 2 homes, let's just say 2 homes or a duplex, one resident leaves or you have a flood in that unit and you got to take it down for a few months.
Yeah.
50% of your income's cut. So you'd be better off, to Ty's point, buying a 30 or 40 unit mobile home park somewhere and operating it. And then your occupancy swing of 5% per year, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 units max. I mean, that'd be up to 10% plus, and then that's it. It only impacted your income by 10%.
You're not buying a mansion and driving Mercedes-Benz with that one deal, but like neither are you on any other place where you first start out, unless you're hitting the lottery. And like ultimately, wealth, it takes time. And so if you're looking for cash flow and that's something you want to do, you can even do that passively. Like I think a lot of people, maybe you're successful and you've got a few $100,000 and want to put it somewhere. It's like, maybe consider buying a 30 unit mobile home park. You probably could manage it in 10 to 20 hours a week once you kind of got your feet under you. So,
and I'll wrap up with, don't, buy in a good location, try to get city services, don't buy a tweaker town. I was just talking to a guy and he was looking at a locally like a deal and it's like, oh my God, be careful.
Yeah.
Not all mobile home parks are made equal in that you still need to look back on old school metrics, location.
And due diligence. It can even,
private utilities will absolutely kick your butt. Our first deal had a private well. When you're providing water to people as a consumer, now you're a water and a utility provider. It's a nightmare. So city services in a good location, in a good major metropolitan location would be my 2 cents. But then I'll go around back to the funnel for Ben, because in the end, it's a lot of work and you have to build a team. So like what you're talking about is like the younger 20s that want to start. If you have the energy and the time, go. And do it. We'd highly recommend it. Eventually, we want to put out a class to discuss the main 101 points of operating, a mobile home park. But on the other end of that coin is if you're a professional and you've made a good living and you want to shift from being like a W-2 high earner or even a small business operator, you really should consider investing with a group like us, because we've learned gone through all of the learning experiences and the bumps and bruises along the way, and the under budgeting for larger CapEx items and
blood, sweat, and tears.
And tears to manage this. This is not like, oh, you just buy it and forget it. There's a lot to the management of it. So
without
there's
question,
a lot of
that's the dynamic.
Yeah.
When you're young and you have the energy and you need to build some wealth, go for it. But when you've already made some money, a lot of the people that have ever really looked into it that are higher net worth decide to go through somebody that really understands how to operate them well.
Yeah. And for the record, that's what I do here with the company is operate. I'm talking to the young gun hustlers that want to get their T sharp and that want to get in the game and, aren't just like managing a portfolio.
Amen.
That's the people that I think should look at it.
It's true.
There's so much good knowledge here. And I love Ty bringing that into as far as doing your own deals. But to Blake's point, if you're a high net worth or you're a busy professional or you've already made your wealth, like call us and you're interested in this, call us. We know how to protect and grow your wealth in the most tax efficient way in one of the best real estate asset classes out there. And it's 12 caps sound nice, but a 12 cap means there's a lot of risk. And if one of those private utilities or something goes wrong, that's a lot of money that you got to write a check for. And,
which we've experienced.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so, lean on our expertise, our failures over 16 years, our team of 50 plus individuals. And, we'd love to chat with anyone that's interested in what we do. Obviously we're really passionate about it. But if you've already made your wealth, keep it, cash flow it and grow it and pass it off to your heirs.
Diversify it into this amazing asset class.
I have a couple more things and then I'll wrap up. Something that came to mind was you just said depreciation. Something that you got to keep in mind for the difference in buying apartments or mobile home parks or anything like homes is because in mobile home parks, you don't own the above ground improvements like the framing and the concrete and all of the improvements that go with a home structure or an apartment structure. The depreciation is like 2x on how much you can realize, especially as like a real estate professional or just offsetting other holdings on your tax return. Depreciation is so great in the space because we allocate as much as we can legally through cost segregation studies. Trump won, it's green light. We're going to go back into the realm of really good real estate tax efficient kind of cost segregation study dynamics within the tax code. And with mobile home parks, we allocate as much as we possibly can to the infrastructure and all of just the roads, plumbing, electrical, and mechanical infrastructure, which is an under 15-year asset as an improvement, which means it can be accelerated in comparison to the longer-term building materials like all of the walls and major improvements above the ground. And so that's a huge benefit to not only offset your taxes, but also it's like if the returns are equal and we have 2x the taxes, it's one of the best reasons and why a lot of wealthy people now are shifting from just multi to owning multi and mobile home parks. And it's why we want to focus on this space specifically indefinitely, because we think that more and more demand is coming from the investment space because of the tax treatment.
Yeah. And I think that's a good pivot to say coming soon, because let's do an episode on depreciation and taxes and the remaining items on the list that you were just saying and have some fun with that because there's a lot there.
When we have a CPA recorded interview already, but it's like that's a huge difference between multifamily and mobile home parks. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. That's a wrap. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to displaying more information here soon.
Yep. See you next time.